Coming to you, pre-recorded and heavily edited. He's from Gosford and he'll tell you about it. This is Prib!
Hello. Hello. Good to see you all. Yes, hello. Welcome to the show. Hello. Yes, I see you. Jesus fucking Christ. Hello. Welcome to the show. My name is Prib. That's what my friends call me at least. And it's so good to see you all. Thank you all very much for coming out. Now, I'm going to dive straight into the news today. News? Wait a minute. Why am I the one that needs to tell you the news? Isn't that like a journalist job? I'm in like a silly little fucking suit. What am I supposed to do with this? I'm not supposed to do anything. I mean, I kind of want to spend more time on that. I want to... That's okay with you guys. Yeah, get into it, I guess. This format of entertainment, late night comedy, is just an extension of something that's been happening for a very, very long time. Comedians have often been known as the truth tellers of society, and whether you believe that to be true or not is subjective. But they aren't really bound by company values or by their own self-interest. They just kind of just say things. And that's why journalists these days can be restricted. Now, that isn't to say that modern journalism is fading away, but if we were to use the work of, say, Johann Lidberg and their work on media ownership, we will quickly see the disparity between what a journalist's jobs actually should be and what journalists are expected to do these days. Lidberg uses the work of David McKnight and their synthesizing of Rupert Murdoch's influence and access to political leaders, in which two main things are clear. McKnight states that Murdoch uses journalism to gain commercial advantages. This is done via hiring editors who think like him. If an editor loses the ability to think like Murdoch, she is replaced. The Murdoch editor clones can then be trusted to run lobbying campaigns like the one on weaker and weaker media ownership regulations, which is lucrative to News Corp, as it allows the company to expand and buy more of Australian and global news and media markets. And then there's this, from the same article. When all News Corp's outlets in multiple countries run the same editorial and news reporting line, their influence is immense. One potent example of this was the lead-up to the 2003 Iraq War. Lidberg continues by pointing to former Communications Minister Helen Coonan, and how the minister engineered, heavily lobbied by the big media companies, media regulation ownership reforms that allowed for increased ownership across media platforms. This reform was then relitigated by the Turnbull government in 2017, which allowed for the monopolisation of the Australian news media market. So journalists are having a rough go of it with job opportunities and are also engaged in some moral battle with how journalism should be. But you're still here, listening to me, talk about the news. Isn't that something? Let's go to the desk. Desk time! People talk about credibility in journalism. Who do you trust? Why do you trust them? You trust the desk. The desk is safety. I can prove it as well, and I'll use techniques that are used by late-night hosts and comedians alike, as well as 2 peer-reviewed studies to properly flesh out the body of this piece. Doing this, I'll be able to effectively show you how comedians and late-night hosts are becoming our news, as well as helping our news. When I say that you trust the desk, it's more of a metaphor, really. You trust those who sit behind the desk. In a study conducted by Lauren Feldman and Daniel Goldthwaite-Young, multiple statistics by the National Annenberg Election Survey were collated to determine that during the 2004 presidential primaries, people who reported the highest rates of exposure to learning from late-night comedy programs were the same individuals who reported the highest rates of exposure to more traditional news outlets, which is basically to say that people who are invested in the news find more ways to obtain their news. And that makes a lot of sense. You see people like Seth Meyers or Stephen Colbert or Bill Maher actively inviting politicians and theologians and business owners alike onto their show to talk about themselves. Often there'll be some quick anecdote about how they had a quick brush with celebrity or what kind of food they don't like, but a lot of the time they're talking about, policy reform, or the actual nitty-gritty journalism you require. Why, just 2 months ago, Bill Maher was interviewing Bernie Sanders on student debt forgiveness, directly after his segment where he was talking about trigger warnings. As a sidebar, I don't think there's anything more juxtaposed and hilarious to me than Bill Maher taking jabs at like millennials and Gen Zs, but also getting Bernie Sanders, like their Jesus, onto the show and talk about it. It's fucking delicious. I love it. Let's stay with Bill Maher while we're here. And to do this, I'm going to switch to our field reporter. I know! I got a field reporter. It's fucking mental. His name is me and I'm here now. And now I'm in a field. Bill Maher did something incredibly interesting about 10 years after the 2004 presidential primaries. There was an online Twitter campaign that he started during the 2014 presidential primaries called #FlipADistrict. During this campaign, he attempted to use satire in a year-long effort to point out the flaws in the political system, which was causing gridlock in the House. Maher even said that this year we're going to be entering the exciting world of outright meddling with the political process.
Thomas A. Selleck produced a peer-review article about this campaign and its effectiveness in galvanizing the public into action. And if we look back at the beginning of this piece, we can see how these campaigns can turn people to more traditional news outlets. If we look at these campaigns and late night just in general, we can see that they are packaging the world in a much more satirical way, making the watcher want to go and learn more about the news they are consuming. Now it's back to me in a suit. Welcome back to me. All the things I've talked about in this piece previously, media ownership, statistics involved with late night viewership and with news traditional viewership, the campaigns used by late night shows to actively incorporate their guests and audiences into political reform and to the news. All these things help educate and galvanize the audience. And it's a part of something bigger. There's a larger concept here that makes it easier to explain. Citizen journalism. Explored by Melissa Hall in her article, Citizen Journalism, it is a concept that has often been discredited as participatory or merely citizen journalism. But it essentially refers to any form of journalism, any news, be it text, audio, visual, that was made by a non-professional. This discreditation leads some people to believe that this type of journalism is lesser, or not as important. But I think that's not correct. I think it should be more thought of like a symbiotic kind of sense. A lot of citizen journalism is quite frequently used in more traditional news outlets. Granted, this symbiosis is more skewed towards the traditional news outlet. Melissa Wall cited Lily Cantor in her study on UK journalists that were part of a journalist group before that were joined by citizen journalists. She found that some reporters viewed citizen journalism mainly as a source for professional produced reports. But if we look back at the statistics that I showed you before about late night comics and their use of citizen journalism, we can see that this is a flawed statement. The work that these journalists did, and I will call them journalists, actively encouraged the public to go out and get themselves involved with the news and go and find more news. And just one more thing on the dismissive attitude towards citizen journalism. I'm going to take you all the way back to the beginning of the piece, where I talked about Rupert Murdoch. You know, our old buddy who basically owns everyone's thoughts. Well, you don't have to worry about that with citizen journalism. People tend to trust people who are outside the establishment they don't trust already. Citizen journalism is generally boots on the ground, very sympathetic, a lot of care into it kind of journalism. And that's mainly because it's something they really are passionate about. It's not something they're paid to do, it's something they want to do. Throughout this piece, I've primarily tried to connect traditional news outlets with late-night comedy hosts, seeing how they generally can package the news a bit better and give it to you on a silver platter. But I think there's so much more to explore outside of that. The idea of satire not being only suitable but an effective transport for the news, the proliferation of media ownership, and how citizen journalism can help ease the burden of some traditional news outlets, all the way to statistics about how late night hosts are helping deliver news more effectively, or at least help you find news and engage with it. And now that I'm done talking, I'm going to take off this silly suit, I'm going to return it, take a long shower, and think about what I've done. Thank you.